This is TWiT.
Speaking of Porto, I'm guessing that this comes from Porto.
It does not.
But it says it's Vinho.
I know. That's the one that's what I'm stuck on too.
Yeah.
Isn't it Portuguese? What is it?
No, it's weirder than that. So I have
good.
I have friends. I don't know you know this, but I do have friends, and these friends bring me things. And so while I was in Lithuania, my friends Ben and Heather had brought me a little sample of this whiskey. They put it the way they got it, because they're very much travel, warriors. So carry on only. So how do you bring me a sample of whiskey carry on only? They put it in a little 2-ounce bottle and carried it in their toiletry bag. Right. Aww. So I was able to have a decent
You only
shot
got
at this.
2 ounces.
So I got 2 ounces, enough to taste it, very reasonable. But this is the Kavalan Vinho Barrique, which is from Taiwan.
Taiwan.
What? Taiwan.
That is not what I would have thought looking at the name. I would have thought maybe Finnish from Kavalan.
No,
maybe
I would have sworn.
Vinho,
even if you go to
Barrique.
the website, that island looks like it's off the north of Scotland.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's supposed to probably.
And so, now for our little geopolitical lesson. So Taiwan is about a 36,000 square kilometer island. It's about 14,000 miles in the measures of the oppressors. Mountain ranges on the east coast, plains in the west coast. It's about 160 kilometers from mainland China across the Taiwan Strait, Japan to the northeast, Philippines to the south. The South is China Seas to the south, the East China Seas to the north, because directions are complicated, because the Philippine Sea is to the east. And of course, it's a subtropical environment, although the southernmost parts of Taiwan are considered fully tropical. So that's hot summers, monsoons, very mild winters. Not a normal thing you'd think of for growing whiskey, although there's been people on this island and the islands around it literally for millennia. The first evidence of human occupation of that land goes back 30,000 years. There's clear evidence of agriculture starting around 3000 BC in an abruptly emergent culture that probably walked across a land bridge. The interaction with the mainland, with the Chinese mainland, starts in the Yuan dynasty, which is about 1300 AD. Of course, then the Europeans arrived. The Portuguese named the island Formosa when they discovered it in the 1600s. And then it was both a Dutch and a Spanish colony. They fought over it for about 20 or so years until a local, someone named Zhang Shengdong in 1662, successfully defeated the Dutch and made it his base of operations while he was fighting a rebellion against the Qing dynasty, which he lost in 1683. And then the Qing dynasty ruled that island for a couple of hundred years as part of the dynasty. Not until the Sino-Japanese War of 1895 does things change, when Taiwan actually becomes part of Japan, until the end of World War II. So about 50 or so years at the end of World War II, when Japan's in full retreat, the Republic of China takes control of the island, which is good because within a few years towards the end of the Chinese Civil War, Li Ka-shek and the rest of the ROC will retreat in 1949 onto the island, and the communists cement their victory that becomes China. But ROC remains on Taiwan and rules as the only for about 40 years until democratic reforms in the 1980s, whereupon they become what is known as the Taiwan Miracle, or one of the 4 Asian tigers, along with South Korea and Hong Kong and Singapore, that becomes a rapidly industrialized nation, sort of a demonstration model for how you can abruptly convert an economy. Today, there's about 24 million people living on the island. And it's where TSMC is and many other interesting and important things. However, when it comes to alcohol, until 2002, Taiwan had a completely state-controlled corporation called the Taiwan Tobacco and Liquor Corporation that dealt with anything to go with tobacco and liquor. They made their own beer, although it was largely based on the German-American style, and also made what would be appropriate local liquor like shoju and the like. There is a domestic liquor that is really derived from a Chinese style called Chao Lang, which is made from fermented sorghum, more potent than shoju. It's called Chinese white wine in direct translations. There are versions that are in the 50-60% range. There's an Everclear variant that's like 92% alcohol, good for stripping engine parts. But after 2002, when Taiwan joins the World Trade Organization, they end their monopoly and allow more imports as well as local production of alcohol. And very quickly, Taiwan became a huge fan of whiskey. In 2021, they imported 22 million liters of whiskey, of which 90% of that came from Scotland. So like Japan, they had a really strong interest in Scottish whiskey. And the Scots were enthusiastic too, because the way that Taiwan taxes spirits is by alcohol content and volume, not by the retail price of it. So not only was whiskey relatively low taxed, but expensive whiskey was very low taxed. And so high-end whiskey is very, very common in Taiwan. They do have excess drinking culture, very much a binge drinking culture, although in recent years there's been a big pushback against that.
Kind of like Japan, huh?
Yeah, the same, and Korea as well. Like it is sort of a known issue that is now sort of transforming. So very quickly after the WTO connection, a conglomerate called King Car, which is built by it's a family business. The founder is Tien-Tsai Lee, and this King Car literally translates to like drive wealth. They make beer, they make hygiene products, Mr. Brown coffee. They have an aquaculture conglomerate.
Mr. Brown coffee?
Mr. Brown coffee.
It comes in a can in a vending machine, right? Something
like that. It's free. It's freeze-dried coffee, and
free of charge.
Freeze-dried.
Oh, freeze-dried. Okay, yeah.
And so Lee is a big fan of whiskey, so he wanted a whiskey operation. And by 2005, he started Mr. Brown Coffee. He started on building a distillery they called Kavalan. Kavalan the name comes from the local indigenous people of the region that they built the distillery in. So it's got a tie-in with the native people. The area is called Yilan, which is up in the high northeast corner of Taiwan, would arguably be the coolest part, although they're up against the hills there because very good high quality water supply. And as the distillery was built very quickly, they went totally Scottish. So Forsyths of Scotland supplied 4 distills, sent a pair of 7,000 liter spirit stills, a pair of 12,000 liter wash stills. And they hired as an advisor a fellow by the name of Jim Swan, who I should almost do a whole separate show about. Dr. Jim Swan, who's passed now, known as the Einstein of whiskey. Worked with dozens of distilleries. The ones you probably heard of would be like Clydeside in Glasgow, Kilchoman on the Isla, Amrut in India, which is on my radar. I do have a bottle of it. At some point, we'll do a show on him. He's published, he's literally a PhD in whiskey making and has published a bunch of papers on that. And one of his specialties was how to make good quality whiskey in hot climates. And so he spent 10 years working with Kavalan. And his focus was specifically on what they called wood policy, or what kind of wood would work well in the conditions that Taiwan offers. And his focus was on you should be using American oak rather than European oak, as European oak tends to be more bitter in those kinds of temperatures. But he also developed a methodology for utilizing barrels called the STR cask treatment. STR short for shaved, toasted, and recharred.
Oh man, I do that every morning.
There you go.
Otherwise known as Mr. Brown, of course.
Saturday night at my place. This really came about in the early 2010s when whiskey was taking off and there was a big shortage of barrels. And so he sort of showed that you can take existing barrels, including wine casks, and shave them down, take the interior surface off, toast and char them, and utilize them again. So better utilization of barrels. And Kavalan took this to heart and makes a large array of different kinds of whiskey. Now, this place has been in operation for less than 20 years, but by 2016, they were doing so well, they built a second distillery and added 16 more stills. So they're now up to 20 stills, although all identical, all the same style of wash and spirit stills from Forsyths. So they produce 9 million liters of alcohol a year. Their barley comes from Scotland and Finland because it's not a good growing conditions for barley on Taiwan. They have 16 stainless tanks for fermentation. And their storage facility is a pair of 5-story warehouses that are built into the hills and try to keep as cool as possible. Because of the frequency of earthquakes in Taiwan, they're very careful with how they strap their barrels. So they tend to take 4 barrels and strap them together and mount them onto the rack so they can take some shaking without a lot of trouble. But they do have high temperatures to deal with through the summer. And so their angel share, which is, in a place like Scotland, between 1% and 2% per year.
I bet with the heat.
15%.
Wow.
So they don't do a lot. They haven't had time to do long aging, but also long aging just doesn't serve them particularly well. And it means their whiskeys come across with strong flavors in a short amount of time. But their relationship with Dr. Swan also opened them, get them access to a lot of different barrels. So they do a lot of unique barreling. So almost all of their whiskeys are initially aged in American oak, both virgin and used bourbon casks. Very Scottish approach to it. And then they'll do different kinds of finishing barrels. So you will see some ports and some sherries and some wine finishes. And that's what we're talking about here. The Vinho Barrique is actually a barrique is a kind of cask that stores wine. But in this case, the Vinho Barriques have been STR'd. They've been shaved and toasted and recharred for doing aging. The expectation of this particular whiskey, the one we're talking about, the Vinho Barrique, is about 5 years old. Again, no age statements on any of Kavalan's whiskeys. This, I only had 2 ounces of it. Boy, it was good. Got it, big, strong fruit notes.
You
vanilla,
wouldn't expect that,
oak.
To be honest. With
No, and this is one of the reasons that Heather and Ben brought it to me. It's like they were in Taiwan. This is the biggest distillery in Taiwan. So they figured they'd try it out. They tried a lot of different ones, and then they were pinging me saying, "Yeah, we're bringing you some of this."
That's really interesting. Yeah,
the one I had was 54.8%. So basically a cask strength, a lot of clout to it, and it is available in Canada. I can get it. The bottle is $315 Canadian, which is about $225 US if you can find it.
Wow.
Relatively hard find. There's only a couple more distilleries in Taiwan so far, but this is the big one. And they've won a bunch of awards, including this whiskey itself has won World Whiskey Awards. They've won Best Distillery Awards. Like, they're doing good things, but they're plugged into some of the best, which there's a reason for why they've been as successful as they've been.
It's very cool.
Yeah, it was a fun tour for me, and it's the same way my friend Glenn brought me the sledgehammer, the Halidson from last week. There's a little bit left. It's only a 500 ml bottle.
You got good friends. I
do have good friends, and they're starting to enjoy the fact that I'm doing all these nutty things with whiskey. So there've been more being brought to me all the time. So I have some fun with it. Anyway, I thought a Taiwanese whiskey would be fun, and it was delicious, really extraordinary.
Solist Vinho Barrique.
That's it.
Single cask strength. And it has been shaved, toasted, and recharred.
That's it. That's what they did.
And also shaken, apparently, thanks to all the earthquakes. So
yes.
Thanks to Mr. Brown. Wow. We have gone all around the world on this episode, and now we're right back where we started. It's kind of a major miracle, but I'm so glad you guys were here to do it.